Stop. And we're still live on YouTube. Okay, right, sorry about that. We were just talking about threats and challenges. So I'm devastated to see clearly a lot of hard work and thought has gone into this, and now we've had a heavy rainfall and the garden is damaged. I hope it can recover. The lesson that we have to take from this is we have to observe the system, what it looks like when it's stretched like this, when it's been stressed, and then ask ourselves, what strategies can we put in place so that the next time this happens, the garden doesn't get washed away? Can we can always predict where the water, where that surface flow is going to go, because it's going to go downhill. If we're on very, very flat land, then we don't need to raise up very far because the water level will spread obviously very broadly. So it will, the flatter the land, the smaller the resultant rise might be. If we're in any kind of a hollow or shape, we need to understand that shape of that land, and we can then predict where that water flow will go, and we can make interventions to divert it away. Now, only you will know the subtle details of the site that you're in. The second thought that I have is, obviously, so water is going to flow on the surface, where it's going to go, where is it going to go, and where's that, can we, once we've filled up our swales and once we've irrigated our land, where can we dump off the surplus water and give that somewhere to go? Yeah. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about climate change and what it is and what we can expect is going to happen. And obviously no one knows exactly, but the evidence is that this problem is escalating quite quickly. So we have to think about it. And I think this is the most immediate, or the most kind of the long-term, all-encompassing threat is changing weather patterns. So it's been hot before, it's been dry before, we've seen lots of variations before, so that we can understand that. So this is a temperature anomaly that we're looking at. Here's the map of the world, and obviously the redder bits are the hotter bits and the blue bits are the colder bits. And the red is hotter than average and the blue is colder than average. And this picture of this temperature gradient map of the Earth is from 1976. And there's a reason why I picked it is, as you see here, there's a band of red right across the UK and northern France and across northern Spain. Look at that, there's like a red ring there. So that is hotter than average temperatures. So in the 1976, Britain had its then warmest ever summer. And it went on for months and it didn't rain and we all went on drought and we all had to save our water and be very, very careful, and it had never happened before. Well, not in living memory. This was a very unusual event, and in some ways, we live in a cool country and a cool temperate climate. So when it was sort of hot, everybody felt like, well, hey, it's like being on holiday, or it's like the summer. But it went on too long, and a lot of the crops failed, and and there were drought and water shortages and bushfires, things that we'd not really seen before, and there you go, 1976. So last year, 2022, we had another hot summer. And actually, we had our hottest ever temperatures in the United Kingdom in August. It was 41 degrees centigrade. And in our climate, it's really, really uncomfortable when it gets that hot. And everything stops working because we didn't build our infrastructure um, to survive 41 degrees centigrade. So things start melting, and roads start melting, and electricity systems start breaking, and all sorts of problems. But so lots of people in the UK said, some people were panicking and saying, "Oh, is this climate change? Is this a a sign of the times?" And other people were saying, "Remember 1976? It was hot then. Nobody freaked out then. Why are we panicking now?" And the answer is, if you look at the global heat map for the last year, this is what it looks like. So yes, UK is red, higher than average, but in this, the whole world is higher than average. It's only we've got a few the cooler spots down here, but look at the difference. That is the summer of 76. That is the summer of 22. This is clearly something's changing. And look, we've got these deep, deep red areas, North Africa, over Italy, and actually down in the Antarctic as well. So the average climate change across the whole planet at the moment is 1.2 degrees, but that's the average. So there are places where the temperature is 13 degrees centigrade higher than normal. Very significant changes are happening. There are places where temperatures now going above 50 degrees. And then once you get above 40, plants can't really grow anymore. And so we're experiencing stresses like we haven't had before. So we can't completely protect ourselves from that, but we have to understand when we say design from patterns to detail, folks, this is the pattern. We used to have in 76 there were, yes, occasionally erratic, hotter than average events, but now it's happening right across the board. So realistically, we need to understand that the climate is changing. It's affecting us now, and we have to be realistic about that. Hi, Andre. Thanks for joining us. We're talking about permaculture and disasters and challenges and how we respond to adversity. So, and I welcomed you to our summer season with the Festival of Beltane. People, as a tradition of, anticipating the coming summer and the growing seasons. But our weather patterns are changing, and we're experiencing now our changing climate. And it is, when we look at these patterns and we look at it with, what's that, from 76, that's sort of a 40-year gap, that's a big change. Okay, so let's not call it global warming or climate change. Climate change sounds like it's just a gradual change, or it's something that we could adapt to, and it's not. It's all normal patterns are starting to go away, and that is in itself, it's a crisis. It's a very, very serious problem, and I actually think that, well, I know that to respond to it, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take the whole world has to respond. It's not going to be business leaders or thought leaders or the IPCC making a decision and it's going to go away. Is what's going to happen is the world's going to carry on doing the wrong things until their systems break, because we've had 40 years of warning about this, and sadly we haven't done anything. Um, so I've been looking into this more and more of the as you know, as this reality unfolds. So, what can we expect? Again, is don't think of it as global warming. Sounds like everything's just slowly warming up. It's sort of like a never-ending summer. That's not really what's happening. What's happening is because we've changed the atmosphere by putting all of this carbon into it, carbon dioxide, because we burnt oil and diesel and coal and gas. We've cut down lots of forests. We've allowed soils to dry out. We've allowed so much carbon to return into the atmosphere that we've changed the atmosphere of the planet. And that carbon sits in the atmosphere like a blanket. Energy from the sun shines in, bounces off the surface of the planet, and then is trapped by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so that yes, there's an overall warming effect, as we saw in those graphs. But what does that warming do is it turbocharges the weather systems. It's trapping energy. Think of it as energy, not heat. It's energy. And with that energy, that's going to make winds become faster and stronger. It's going to push the circulation of water vapor and things is going to change. More heat means more evaporation. More evaporation, water vapor is also it traps heat, and so we're going to experience turbocharged weather systems. Some places might be hotter. As a result, other places might be cooler, or they might be hot or cool at different times of the year. We're going to get more extreme temperatures. Some places will be wetter, some places will be drier. When we have droughts, they might go on for longer, and when we have rain, we might have a more torrential rain system. So the patterns, the things that we were so used to, are now becoming erratic. They're becoming, we're losing the patterns that we're familiar with. So let's just be realistic that we're moving into this. And if the whole world comes together, stops all the emissions, and we grow back all the trees and rebuild all the topsoil, it's still going to take years to slow the climate effect. We're experiencing the warming effect of the 80s and 90s now. It takes 10, 20 years before the carbon that we emit now, before that has its impact. So we're in for a rocky ride, folks, and we can't just hope that it's going to be okay. We are going to experience adversity, and we need to begin to understand that and to think how we're going to plan for it. So that's, we can expect things to be more energized, stronger, more powerful, more extreme. Hopefully we'll have periods of stability in between, but it will become erratic. It has become. So let's think about how that's going to affect. I mean, for sure it's going to affect our farming and growing systems. That's something that we're looking into, and we're going to have to focus more on. But think about the social impact. How will these weather events, how might that affect us, our communities? And the reality of these events is it's going to have an uneven effect. So some places might be almost destroyed and really suffering, and other places, we're fine. Might just be a few miles away from each other, or it could be big distances. So it's going to have an uneven effect. That's for sure. It's also, unfortunately, it's going to amplify the inequalities between us. Richer people with more resources, will be better placed to deal with these stresses. more vulnerable people are more exposed. The people living in the lowlands are going to get flooded. The people in the highlands might be okay. So let's also understand that this is not going to be a universal thing, and some of us are a lot more vulnerable than others, and richer people have insurance. Richer people have nice cars. If there's a storm coming, they can drive away and claim on their insurance. The ones of us that don't have those resources are going to be challenged. There's a very, very powerful example out there that we can all learn from, and it's Hurricane Katrina. Now, what year was that? It was about 2005 or something. I've forgotten now. Hurricane Katrina was an incredibly powerful tropical storm. It came off the Gulf of Mexico, and it hit the city of New Orleans in the southern states. And it was a series of disasters happened. So the first one was New Orleans is a city that's right at sea level, and there's a big system of water management around it with dams and levees and canals and a very clever complex system to prevent flooding. Well, that had been badly maintained and not invested in for decades. So it created the conditions, underinvestment, bad planning, created the conditions for something to go badly wrong. We then had Storm Katrina, which was the most powerful, I don't know exactly, hurricane to make landfall and to hit a major city. It hit a city that is at sea level. So then there was terrible flooding. What had happened, of course, in New Orleans is there'd been a warning, and people had been told there's a really bad storm coming. All the people who could afford it got in their nice SUVs or in their big cars, and they drove upstate. They drove upstate and they stayed in hotels. And after the storm had blown away, they came back to New Orleans and they filled in their insurance forms and they claimed their, for the damage. All the poor people couldn't do that, so they stayed in the city and thought they'd tough it out. And the lower parts of the town where the poor people live were the ones that got the worst flooding. So the people who couldn't afford to leave were also the people that got flooded out. The next thing that happened was then they were cut off without food and water for several days. And so some of those people then started opening up shops and accessing the resources in the shops. The American government saw that as poor people breaking into shops, and they called it looting. So they sent in the army to shoot at them. So the people who didn't have the resources to survive were then demonized for trying to look after themselves. And then the next part of the tragedy was when it came to rebuilding the city, of course, it again was the people with the least amount of money who got the least support. So we have to really think about this level of exposure and what it's going to be like as we experience these extreme weather events. Also, what we saw in Hurricane Katrina, and we see again, of course, is that the very support services that exist to help people in emergencies also tend to get damaged and cut off. So then again is people are left sometimes for days or weeks to fend for themselves before help comes. We've just seen a really powerful tropical cyclone has hit Malawi. Areas of the country where people are subsistence farmers, they don't have spare resources, they don't have savings, their crops have been washed away, their houses have been washed away. Many of them waited for days before they even got blankets, so sleeping out in the open, and really struggling to survive. And getting small donations sent out to them, but so we have to think and anticipate the realities of these situations. And with permaculture, we have a strategy to organize, to rebuild, and to put things together. And so this is what I want. This is really the theme of this week's lecture. So we're going to disrupt our food systems. It's going to have this social impact. It's going to have an economic impact. And even if it hasn't happened to us, it's happened to another community. That has a cumulative impact. So think about cost of food, cost of materials, disruption to jobs, disruption to trade and commerce. I was chatting to some of the people from Malawi, and they were just saying, you can't get building materials. Even a stone now has value because so much stuff was washed away. Now, many of you guys rebuilding your lives in refugee settlements. Again, this must sound familiar, and got to keep asking ourselves, what can we learn? What have we learned from the disturbances that we've experienced? And how can we bring that learning into our own disaster responses? So I started to think about how we respond, and we respond by organising. So I'm just remembering, I wanted to add something to this slide. I am writing this slideshow as we speak. I'm looking at the that diagram again that we were given a few weeks ago, and I find it very useful. So I'm just going to. Sorry, I'm writing the lecture as we. So here we go. I've also got my little kitten here, and it's unhappy that it hasn't got my attention. So if you hear little cries, that's what it is. Slideshow from current slide. Okay. Hope you can see that. So here's our disaster response cycle, which we've had given to us from our. Okay, so that. However, we are in this cycle is we move from being preparedness. We anticipate the problem. We need to have some kind of strategy in place to think, what happens if there's a flood? What happens if there's a fire? What happens if we don't have any money? When that thing comes around, we initiate that response, and we set that in motion, and then we go into a recovery phase. Okay, the flood has subsided, the fire has subsided. What are we going to do next? How do we rebuild? And as we rebuild, we mitigate. That means we start to put in place, we don't just fix what was broken, but we actually have to improve our systems so that if it happens again, we've applied the learning. So now we've moved back to being prepared and have a strategy in mind for what happens if there's a fire or a flood or we don't have any money. So think about this ongoing learning process for how we might deal with external challenges, things that we have, which we have to begin to bring this into our design, into our planning. So, yeah. So our response is to organize. That means having a plan. And one way that we can, if there's a challenge, a disaster, a challenge, an extreme weather event, a flood, fire, famine, we could sit around as individuals and wait to be rescued. Maybe the government will come and help. Maybe a big NGO, a big aid agency the World Food Programme might come, or UNHCR might come. Let's hope they do. There's many NGOs, non-government organisations that exist to support people at different times. You might have private donors, connections to the West, or people in other parts of the country who can help you. That's great. That's great. I call those top-down responses, okay? There's you sat in your field. There's the guys at Nachi Valley with their flood. Are we just going to sit and wait to be helped? Or the question I want to put to you is, how do we organize ourselves? The bottom-up response is, how do we organize ourselves so that we can meet our local needs from local resources? So, and then actually, by organizing ourselves into teams, into having responses, having strategies in place, as and when that top-down help comes along and say, hey guys, are you all right? You can say, well, we need this and we need that. You can be specific about what kind of help you need, what kind of resources you need. And if you are organized into a structure, that makes it a lot easier for people to know how to help you. So if some resource comes in from the outside, how would you allocate that? Are you all going to fight over it? I want it. No, I want it. Or are we going to have a plan? What I've noticed, and I understand, but what I've noticed is sometimes when these things happen, something bad happens, everything washes away, many individuals go onto Facebook, onto GoFundMe, onto those giving fundraising things and say, help, give me some money, something terrible has happened. It's very unlikely, it's very hard for people to know what they're funding. And the more of a plan, the more of a strategy that you can present to say, look, we're in a bad place, we're trying to get to a good place, these are our stepping stones, that makes it much more likely that you're going to win that support. And don't forget, don't underestimate, there's a thing called donor fatigue, and when people are constantly being asked for help, it becomes harder and harder to respond to that. And sometimes, some days I get 20 or 30 messages from people asking me, can I just give them a little bit of money to help them? And the answer is, I can't, no, I'm really sorry. As much as I might like to, we're limited in what we can do. January, I see you arriving. Welcome. Are you there? Yes, you are. January, welcome. You'll find I've used a couple of your photos in the lecture and the webpage today, because we're talking about how we respond to to external challenges, to things which and you know, really heartbroken to see the damage at your garden, and hope you can respond to this in a timely and effective way. And we've taken that really for a theme for this week's lecture is we have to learn when these terrible things happen, when these extreme events happen, our opportunity is to learn from that, to build a strategy so that the next time it happens, it's not as bad. We can build resilience. So as hard as that must be to hear, this is a learning opportunity for us to build systems that are going to be more robust and more resilient to these challenges. That's how we're going to have to. Yeah, I don't know, Caroline. Maybe January can help us. But yes, these are photos he posted yesterday on Facebook, and I just thought, and there were several people who talked about have experienced heavy rainfall. They have down in Homer Bay as well. So that's our theme for today, is how do we prepare for these kinds of challenges, and what other kinds of threats can we anticipate? Because in our design, we've got to address these things. So we talked about, this is a hot summer of 76 in the Northern Hemisphere. This is the hot summer of 22. Understand that the climate really is changing, and it's trapping much more heat into the atmosphere, and as a result, we are seeing weather systems are high powered, and it's just going to push things to extreme. It doesn't mean it's just going to be warmer. Some places will be hotter, some places will be colder, some places will be wetter, some places will be drier, and we'll have more extremes of, you know, of all kinds of weather. We have to then understand it's not just our growing systems, it's our social systems, our economic systems. They're going to be stressed by this. So we have to organize. There are top-down agencies, governments, NGOs, and so forth, there to try and help people. But often it takes time for them to get to the location. It takes time for them to identify what their response is. So with our permaculture thinking, we know that we have to plan from the bottom up. And if we can better organize at a local level and have strategies in place to meet our needs from local resources, then firstly, we're more resilient. Secondly, we're able to take care of each other. And thirdly, when outside help does come, we know what we're asking for, and that those potential helpers can see that, you know, we've worked out what our responses are. So all of this is how we build our resilience. And I think this is an area of permaculture in responding to these events this is a big area of learning for all of us. So think about this, the bottom-up response and the top-down response. And the more we organize from the bottom up, the better placed we will be. This is my little new friend. I'd like to say hello. It's called cat number 3. Right, and it's very little. So think about this constant cycle of preparedness. You know, there we are, building our systems, building our gardens, building the systems that are going to nourish us, and then a challenge comes: the flood, the fire. We need to respond. What are we going to do in those circumstances? As the event passes, we slowly recover, and then we put strategies in place to mitigate, that's to reduce the impact if this is going to happen again. So this is now the process. So I'm saying to you, observe and interact, build your plan for mitigation, put that in place, and hopefully we won't need it, but if we do, we then know what our response is going to be. And then hopefully our recovery will be more effective and more rapid. So here's our, this is our sort of, again, as our little model to keep in mind. Now, would anybody like to say anything or chip in at this point before I kind of go on, because I set this up? Gerald, any thoughts from you and or anyone else, or shall I just carry on?
Yeah, I would say, particularly for the bioregional organization model, I would encourage members here and even those watching and beyond to take a closer look at this.
Yeah.
Whether you're looking at it from a practitioner level or even from a project management perspective, is really, really a vital tool. It helps you, as we've said, to build your idea from the ground up, from the like minute details, and then build it on upwards. Things, as we always say, that organic kind of setup, you have the details, you have the problems, and you're looking at the solutions that you're going to employ to address that. That's the beauty with it. You draw it, it takes you through, it guides you through. So it's a really vital tool. We've recently used it with one of the teams that we've been training in Tororo, and it was really, it was a really vital tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Tim.
I can say that we lost Andre, did we? Oh, I might be dipping that. Yes, so I was talking to Homer Bay yesterday. Paul Agola, our comrade there, and they have experienced real damage to a lot of their gardens, and he's panicking about what are they going to do? How are we going to organise? So this is the thing. This is really a key question. Is if things break down a bit, we're used to being kind of told what to do or having structures in place. If those structures are disrupted, how are we going to make decisions? Is it just the person with the loudest voice? Or we'll be going back to the Wicker Man and be making sacrifices to entreat the angry gods? Where actually we need to put a strategy in place, and we need to know how we're going to come together and make agreements. And that's what this model gives us. So I'm going to take us into that, actually, Gerald. To as you rightly said, I think it's the tool that we've got. That's right. Okay. So our bioregional organisation. So I want to dig into this a bit. If you've got a template, you've got a basic plan, you will add the details. So remember, permaculture works from patterns to detail. The pattern is we're all the same. We're all Homo sapiens. We're all humans. We all breathe air, drink water, eat food, wear shoes, whatever it is, the things that are universally true. But the detail is, well, you're in a different place, in a different climate, and a different culture. So the food that you eat, it might be different from mine. You might produce it in a different way, but that's the detail. So here's the pattern, and this pattern is kind of true for all of us wherever we are, but the details are going to be different, and only you will know that for your circumstance. So again, this is how we organize ourselves from the bottom up. And so if resources, as and when resources from the top down are available, we know what to ask for and how to ask for it. I'm going to review this because I'm going to choose two areas that we're going to go into in more detail because we skated over a lot of it. I just introduced the model to you, and I feel now that we need to jump into it into a greater level of detail. So here's the pattern. There's 9 sort of key functions as a community, as a society, that we need to have a plan in place for. We need to set up a support team to support that function. They kind of have an order, but we do ultimately need to think about all of them. Well, let's start off. Number 1, food. Remember, so these are 9 areas, and each one of these is going to have a support team around it and a plan. How are we going to feed ourselves? We're going to look at that one. Here are the 9 areas, so let's just recap that. Food, buildings, so food, shelter, livelihood, money. How are we meeting our needs? Because we need more than just food to survive. If we've got food and shelter, that's our first priority. When the storm comes, we need to get out of it. We need some shelter out from it, and we need to be able to sustain ourselves. Okay, those are the first 2 areas we need to have a plan in place for. The next area then is we've got to sustain ourselves in the longer term. We need to have some plans in place for how we're going to achieve that. Our livelihoods, how we're going to earn some money or earn more resources. The social function is, how are people going to come and join your group? How are you going to meet them? How are you going to connect with them? What's the process that's going to happen? You need to have a team of people who are thinking about how you're going to draw people into your group. Are we going to, have strategies in place? We also, as a reminder, is that we were told that for this model to work, you need somewhere between 40 and 300 people. And that as you break down each one of these areas, you give people the responsibilities to work on these different areas. Okay, so we might draw in. Let's think about how we're going to feed ourselves. Let's build a team of 1, 2, or 3 people who are going to start that conversation. So let those people get together and let those people feel empowered to start that process. Okay, same for buildings. We're going how are we going to maintain the infrastructure that we have? How are we going to extend it? How are we going to improve it? What's our plan? How are we going to develop the skills to achieve that? We need to have a plan in place. Livelihood, same. Social, how are we going to keep drawing in more people so our network can grow until it reaches it, till it's fully populated? If especially we're in a distress situation, how are we going to maintain the health of the group? How can firstly we avoid problems and maintain good hygiene and think about all issues around that? Again, that's going to take a dedicated team of people to start to think about those processes. Information, another set of strategies. Community and security, another very important area to be thinking about. Transport. And then the final area, which is I also want to look at this week, is I want to look at food in more detail, and I want to look at future trends and threats, because I think that's if we've got time we can go into look in some of the others, but I think we want to take a bit of time to drill down and look at a couple of these areas in more detail, and then think about how we might actually do this, because I think that say, speaking to the Kenyans yesterday, is they're experiencing, it's the same in Uganda too, is that the economy is not doing well. People aren't earning enough wages from their jobs. The cost of living is going. It's happening here in the UK. Wages are going down. Costs are going up. How are we going to survive? We're not just saying we're going to go it alone, but if the better we can plan and prepare ourselves from the bottom up, then the greater degree of resilience we will have. So people who have skills around food production might gravitate towards that food group. People who understand buildings or have skills of construction might gravitate towards that support group. People with more entrepreneurial mind or organizational might gravitate towards the livelihood group, so on and so forth. And also, especially in the formative stages, you might gravitate to more than one of those groups. You might be involved in two or three of them. But what we need to make sure is that as a wider group, that we're considering all 9 of these areas. Okay, so food, buildings, livelihood, social, health, information, community and security, transport, future trends and threats. Okay, so we had this lovely chart given to us, the author in Australia, who I interacted with a few weeks ago, and this really got me thinking. So he's created a map version, so we can see it in words, or we can see it as a flow, as a process. So maybe this is an easier way to look at it for you, or to see as a list. But let's explore this now in a little bit more detail. So in this particular diagram, we've got our 9 areas going off this hub by our regional organization, and each one of those areas is then broken down and explored and examined. I would suggest that you start to do this for your own community and answer the questions within these bubbles that relate to you. So here we go, is food support. Here it is. Here's one of the 9 areas. And look, it's coming off at about 7 o'clock from there, and it's inviting us to begin the process at about 7 o'clock from here. So I've touched on some of this before, but this is so important. We're going to come back and revise this and go to slightly greater depth. So from people arriving at our food support group, we can say to those people, you want to help? Fantastic. What is your area of knowledge? What is your area of expertise or experience? Or what priority areas do we have that we want to look at? So when it comes to producing food, the whole food production process starts with plants. Because it's plants that translate the energy from the sun into the ground and build fertility and so forth. So we need to build a support team of 1, 2, or 3 people who are really focused on the resources that we need for developing our productive systems or repairing them or whatever our challenge is. So if we need plant resources, we start with a nursery. That's where we germinate seeds and we create new plants. Where are we going to get those seeds from? Well, we need collections of plants, don't we? So could we have seed stores? Can we have living plants? The plants that we're interested in propagating, can we have them growing around us? We can reach out to research institutes, find other sources for seeds. We can become aware of what native species are around us. What reserves are there? When you go out into the bush, what plants can you collect seeds from? What plants could you use for your process of rebuilding soils and rebuilding fertility and so forth. We can, as part of our plant resource strategy, we can now develop demonstration farms and gardens. That's what I see you guys are doing, and now you're setting that on in motion. So say for Andre or for January or for anybody else is, if we can start with your demonstration garden. As it gets bigger, we can add in more species, and then that becomes part of how we train people, how we show people how to do permaculture, how we inspire people to join the group. And also it's beginning now to give us some of our resources. It's beginning to feed us. Once we have demonstration farms and gardens, and I think we've got momentum around the work that we're doing, can we now look to government departments or voluntary agencies? If we're doing something interesting, we should be telling people about it. That might be a good way to win support or to help share knowledge. Plus, there might be other people out there whose job it is to help and support people like you, what you're doing. So if you're innovating within your refugee settlement, within your community, wherever you are, and you're doing something interesting that is visible, demonstrably real. Oh, look, there's their demonstration garden, there's their propagation. Then, there's the opportunity then to win support for that. Within your plant resources, you need to identify who's got the skills, who knows how to do grafting, who knows about composting, who has, whatever the skills that we might be needing. Let's identify who those people are and bring them into our network. So do you remember how we're supposed to start with about 40 people, drawing them in one at a time, finding their place, and then as we populate each one of these areas, our network might grow to 300, or a scale at which we can still effectively work together, but it doesn't become so big that it becomes dysfunctional. Publication and info services, what information out there, what books can we access, what other forms of information can we access. Contractors and consultancy groups. Are there people out there who can help us? If we had money, are the people that we could employ to do our work for us, and are the people out there that can give us advice and support? Let's identify them now. Let's connect with those people and build a relationship with them. Hey, we're a community group. Hey, we're starting a demonstration farm. Can you help us? What help is there out for us? What information is there out there for us? Let's think about the produce, the products, the producers, what's coming out of our system, who's producing it, what kinds of things are they producing, what are the potentials of the system. Again, this is all part of our building a support function around this really important thing that within our community we want to grow. We want to create a support service around developing the right kind of plant resources. And this is going to be, I think, a strong priority. The way I'm now thinking about project development going forward is we're going to have to create a nursery. And from that nursery, we're going to create a model garden or a food forest or a system that's going to start to give us yields, also start to build up our plant resources, gathering seeds, and that's the way we're going to be able to help and support other people and other groups. Many, quite regularly, the question that we're asked for is people say, can you help us with some seeds, please? But it's back to this thing of, well, only so many people can ask for money or resources before we don't have any. So clearly, the long-term answer is we have to generate themselves, the resources ourselves, and we have to use our network that we are building right now through these interactions to start to notice, Ali Tependeki over in Butambala, he's growing vetiver. He might be able to provide some slips for propagation, or just we can identify what sources are out there and become aware of it, build that into our plan. Checklists. We can think about how we share this information, and we're back to nurseries again. So now look, these are all the areas we might want to think about. And then imagine now you look at nursery, and then you build a bubble around nursery, and then you break down all the elements to that and assign people to those functions. So this is where the patterns to detail, it's you to supply the detail. Where's the nursery going to be? Who's going to be involved in it? What plants are we going to propagate? What are our strategies that we're going to use? These are then, see how there's layer after layer. And if we plan in this way, we're supporting key functions with multiple elements. Remember how right at the beginning of the course we said we identify the functions of the design, and then we put strategies and elements in place to support that function. Each function must be supported by multiple elements. So we've gone, the food function includes a plant function, and that plant function is being supported by all of these different sets of strategies which we're setting in motion. Hey, and that's just the plants. Once we started to have some productivity, and we have a surplus, we can now add in the next element, which would be animals. If we start at 7 o'clock on here, is always we start small. Remember, small and slow solutions. That's what we're talking about. But we're through small and slow solutions, we're building ultimately big, long-term lasting systems. That's our objective. Okay, so we need to identify breeders and propagation centers. If we're going to start with animals, we need to hatch some eggs. We need to get some piglets, or what do we start small? Start with the smaller livestock in smaller numbers, and then build them slowly. Okay, so we can start breeding and propagating. We can look to existing species collections. Can we diversify? Can we find breeds adapted for our particular goals? And let's think about, we've talked about aquatic systems as well already, so let's just remind ourselves that we're not just talking about land-based systems. Look to native species, demonstration farms again, government departments, voluntary agencies, skills. Look, a lot of these are the same, but we still got to check in and make sure that, do we have those skills in place? Are the people around us, contractors, consultants, people who have that knowledge that we could buy in or get support from? What publications are out there? What kind of produce are we going to get from our animals? And then we're going to need to have a plan for that. So look how all of these are things that we think about that support the function of having animal resources in our land-based food production systems. Okay, so we start with the plants, we move to animals, and then we think about pest management as always. If we start intensifying productivity in a certain way, then we're going to create the opportunity for other species to come in and take advantage of that. And then we might end up seeing those opportunistic species as being pests, being our enemy, and we might be thinking we need to fight back against them, and we don't. So we talk about IPM, integrated pest management already. We're going to understand biological controls. So I've already said, if you get a profusion of a species that starts to look like a pest, it's because it doesn't have a corresponding predator. So we need to rebalance the ecology, encouraging the predators so that we have a self-regulation as a function within our animal and plant-based system. It says there's safe chemical supplies. I'm not into using chemicals at all. I think that, and I already said the danger is that you, if you target a pest and you eliminate it, then the predator species that eat that are then going to have no food. So you've actually creating an imbalance. We might be able to find biological intervention strategies that we can to calm down pest attack. But again, last week we talked about how when you have very healthy, the healthier the plant, the more dense the sugar in the plant is, the harder it is for a pest to actually take advantage of it and to attack it. So we need good information. Again, we talked about that last week in IPM. And an ongoing management process, which means we need to observe, interact, ask questions, use references and libraries, build up our experience, create checklists so we can share that information with other people in our team. And as we recruit people into the food network, we then assign them to look at these different areas. Each person can have multiple responsibilities, but just you're using this model as a checklist to make sure you're addressing each one of these key areas. Okay, so we're growing plants, we've got animals in our system, we've got enough balance and pest management so that we're actually starting to get our produce, we're getting yield. So then the next question is, what are we producing and how are we going to harvest it? Can we process it? Can we capture it, dry it, store it, freeze it? Can we ferment it? Do we need equipment to can and bottle and to capture? But as the yield comes, so must we harvest. So much must we catch and store. And firstly, we're going to use what comes back from the system, the yields. We're going to use it to feed ourselves and to remember to feed the system that produced it, because we're trying to build the system, build its capacity. Okay? And then, but as we start to have a surplus, what are we going to do with it? We might start a little roadside sales. Well, we've got a little bit more than what we need. We can sit at the side of the road and sell them. That's the easiest way, or perhaps allow people to come and harvest it for themselves. If we want to send it away to market, we're going to think about how we're going to package it, how we're going to store it. Someone's going to have to be the person who thinks about that. So let's enable someone to be thinking about it in advance. Can we use it for swapping, for bartering and exchange? Sometimes better than selling something is to use it as literally as something for barter and exchange. Maybe that's where we can buy in skills or buy in new resources. So important to think about that. Are we then going to try and access local markets if we've got enough spare productivity that we're going to sell it? So we might need to think about delivery or direct marketing, or setting up a co-op, or do we need a retail outlet, or what other advice do we need, or what skills are out there? There we go. So we start with nothing, we grow some plants, we introduce some animals, we build it into a balanced system. We then start to harvest and process. We look to meet local needs, and then we also start to send things to market. See how this slowly builds on itself. And then with those resources, as we start to market them, we can then think about investing more time in, what have we got here? Land planning, the infrastructure like water supply, doing more analysis, residue testing services, fencing supplies. Look, if we, as soon as we've got some money coming in, we've selling some of our produce, we can improve our system. We could have a glass house, a shade house. We could buy some tools, and so on and so forth. So we can invest in support services that are going to build the system so that we have more plant resources to offer, which can then give us more animals. And just, I hope I'm not over labouring this point, and I know that we've looked at this model already, but the more I look into it, the more I think this is really powerful, this is really clever. It's mapping it out for you, and you can look at each one of these points and then make a bubble around that, and just think about how then, as your system evolves and develops, how you could add layer after layer after layer to it. And it's just it's not telling you what to do, but it's giving you a direction. And again, is if we're in some kind of crisis or we're having to make change, or okay, so what, I've forgotten the name of the gentleman who shared this diagram with us, but anyway, what he said was he's been working on this for like 20 years, and he said it's such a clearly obvious, powerful, productive way to organize yourself around functions and priorities, rather than more arbitrary way we make decisions in normally. And what he said was he came to realize that for all of its strengths, humans don't really behave rationally and in such an ordered way until they have to. And when they have to is when there's a crisis. So we've known about the climate problem for 30 years, for more than 30 years. Have we done anything about it? Not enough, not really, because it's not a crisis yet. But once it is a crisis, once you get there, then it's too late. Or then you've got to rebuild from the bottom up again. And that's really difficult. So here we are, looking at this and thinking about this is the building block of how we organize ourselves, how we build resilience, and how we understand that when the times comes, this is how we will have to organize around these functions, because we all need food, we all need shelter, we all need livelihood, we all need health support. These are the things that unify all of us. And that's what we're focusing on in permaculture. Great. I think we're probably due a little break. What do you think? Should we have a little bit of feedback, Gerald, and then a short break?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. If we
Yes.
could have about 5 minutes of feedback, and then
Yeah.
we go for the break. Welcome, Shinaz. And Caroline, Nicholas, any feedback?
Thank you, Gerald. Sorry I'm late.
No, it's all right. You're most welcome. Okay, and yeah, probably Steve.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do a quick recap for Shinaz and anyone else who could have logged on a little bit.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Sure, please.
And don't worry, I'll watch it again on YouTube. If you don't
All
need to see, I'll save you that. It's maybe a very quick one.
Well, we're on small and slow solutions still.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is, we know we're going to face some huge challenges. They're happening already. Economic challenges, climate challenges, and in some ways, with permaculture, we've got to build resilience so that we don't get completely knocked over when these things come along. And I've been really prompted to think about that more deeply, because in the last 24, 48 hours, there's been torrential rains in especially parts of Kenya, and over in, I think, around the southern edge of the lake, and lots of people's gardens and farms just been washed away, lots of distress, and of course, you know, I feel enormous compassion for everyone in that situation, but we're reminded that when we see these extreme events, in whatever form they take, that is an opportunity to learn. That's when we have to observe and interact and actually stick to our permaculture principles and think about if something gets washed away and we rebuild it, we've got to rebuild it stronger, and we've got to understand, have a sense of how we might do that. And I've also talked a bit about how the disorganization that might come when systems break, and we're going to have to organize ourselves perhaps from the bottom up, if that was to happen to us, in whatever form that might happen. And we've gone back to looking at the bioregional organizational chart, which I think is, the more I look at it, the more I think it's really, really important. It's a fantastic resource. And the best thing I could say to the Kenyans last night when we were talking about their challenges is, that's how you're going to have to start organizing yourself around that structure. So yeah, and we'll come back to look at disaster planning next. So yeah, okay, we just have a short break anyway, and I'll see you all in a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Steve.